Welcome everyone to today's Modern Sales Pros digital panel on hiring for diversity. We're super excited to open the channel for this important conversation with our Modern Sales Pros community and whoever else has joined. We're really thankful for the panelists who are going to be a part of today's event. And before we get started, while people are still joining, MSP has started a bit of a tradition where we ask our panelists what quarantine hobbies they've either perfected or started. Angela, let's start with you. What quarantine hobbies have you begun or mastered since the start of the pandemic?
Absolutely. Well, I think it's definitely been a mix of like the first couple months kind of like trying every single thing and being like, okay, like, yeah, I'm going to get into like knitting or I'm going to do this, and be like, no, this is just like me throwing myself into something that I'm not actually interested in. But so mentioning that simply because I love to cook. I've always loved to cook. So for me, it's definitely been like a lot of exploration in the kitchen. So that's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. I love that. I can relate as well. Andrae, how about you?
Oh, that's a great one. I don't know that I would say mastered or perfected, but definitely increased. As Angela already knows, because we work together, I'm a sneakerhead. And so I definitely have increased my trafficking of sneakers since probably March, at least 5 to 10-fold, that's for sure.
That's awesome. I love that. I feel like that's a fun side hustle to have. Very creative. And then Kate, how about you?
So mine was kind of an unintended hobby that I picked up, which is I would like put it under IT specialist.
Oh.
So I have all my kiddos at home and working on Zoom all day long, and have just now become well versed in like every type of Wi-Fi extender, all the different types of networks. I've got Xfinity on speed dial, so I can be, your new source of information for everything Wi-Fi related.
I literally feel the same way. I had like major Wi-Fi issues last week and definitely feel like, oh my God, I'm just like an IT person now. I like understand Wi-Fi, but obviously it's so much more than that. But I definitely relate to that. So thanks for sharing, everyone. We're going to go ahead and dive into today's content. Before we dive into our lovely panelist introductions, here's a quick overview of our agenda. Quick opening remarks, panelist intros. We'll walk through our 4 themes, and then we'll have time for a live Q&A, and then a quick wrap up and thank you. We will be done and good to go by 12 o'clock p.m. The Modern Sales Pros team runs a lot of these, so we've created a great, really efficient training for them. That being said, Modern Sales Pros, if you don't know, is a community of over 20,000 now sales leaders, and everyone is in the sales discipline, whether they're revenue operations, marketing, sales leadership, sales managers, everything. And our community brings these people together to learn from each other and answer each other's questions that they might not be able to answer otherwise. So really grateful to be a part of the community as a member of the Modern Sales Pros team. That being said, I'd love to dive into our introductions for today's panelists. Let's kick it off with Andrae.
Hello. Yeah, so my name is Andrae. I'm currently the Sales and Partnership Enablement Lead at ONA. And in terms of my experience in the DE&I space, specifically around hiring, I spend a lot of time as a coach, a mentor, and an advocate of SVA, which is based on the West Coast and has the primary goal of increasing diversity and specifically tech and tech sales roles throughout, the United States. And for me, at least, I've always find it a personal point and source of pride whenever I have someone message me over LinkedIn telling me that they got a job, either as a result of the program or sometimes my coaching, probably not as much my coaching as the program. But yeah, so I think it's more of a personal for me in terms of trying to champion and coach, and maybe not as institutional for Kate and Angela, but equally interested in from the sales standpoint, understanding there needs to be a push towards increasing not just diversity, but the way we think about it.
Definitely. Thanks, Andrae. And the Modern Sales Pros community knows SVA Academy really well. We do a lot of work with them, and they are one of our incredible sponsors. So love working with them as well. They're an incredible organization. Kate, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Kate Smalkin. I'm currently the head of talent and employer partnerships for an organization not too dissimilar from SV Academy, with a similar mission called Climb Higher. And we are an upskilling organization focused on the Salesforce administration certification. And so, this for me was really a, career move that was based on passion. I come from a long background in pure executive search and had, a realization some way through, that what I was doing was kind of perpetuating some of the longstanding issues that have kept diverse and non-traditional talent out of, the leadership ranks of Silicon Valley tech companies and beyond. And so, for me, this is like a newer foray, but it's absolutely my passion work. And I am just dead set on breaking people into upwardly mobile careers and continuing to try to undo, some of these norms that have become, front and center in 2020.
Amazing. Thanks, Kate. And last but certainly not least, Angela.
Hi. Well, first off, I just want to say that I'm so excited and thrilled to be alongside both Kate and Andrae here, who obviously is my coworker. We both work at ONA. But so a little bit about me, I am the people partner for the go-to-market team at ONA, where I provide people ops and HR support across our global team. In addition, I'm also the program chair for ONA's first DE&I program, and I also manage a number of our learning and development initiatives, including things like our manager and leadership support program. For me, this is something of a personal and professional comes to a sort of point. I think I've always been really, really passionate around equity and inclusion throughout the number of different careers I even had before HR. And I think this is a wonderful opportunity to have an open conversation with people who are interested in the same thing and interested again in learning more. We don't have all the answers. We don't even have all the questions. So I think it's just going to be a great opportunity to be speaking with all of you, and also hearing from all of you as well that have decided to join us this afternoon.
Thanks, Angela. And then if you don't know me, I am Hannah White. I'm one of the community and event marketing managers for Modern Sales Pros. Modern Sales Pros, we like to say we don't have all the answers, and we don't even have all the questions related to DE&I, but it won't stop us from having the conversations. We've begun to put together a lot of resources on the topic for sales leaders, and we've started a DE&I committee within the community to try and push our efforts forward. This event is actually a result of that, so really excited about what we're doing on this front. Before we get started and really dive into today's conversation, just a few notes. You don't have access to the chat panel today as an attendee, but you do have access to the Q&A panel. Anything you'd like to share with panelists or questions you'd like to ask, please submit them as soon as you have them. Our attendees are all prepped and ready to go with a live Q&A format. So if anything comes in on that front, please feel free to submit your questions there. You can also respond to others' questions and upvote. So kind of like a Reddit theme going on here. You can engage with the questions, and if there's a bunch coming in, we can prioritize the ones that are being engaged with more. So I'm really excited to begin and kick off today's conversation. Our first theme for today is what we're calling Real Talk. So debunking the most common myths associated with building diverse organizations. Kate, would you like to kick us off here and kind of dive into what you have seen are some of these most common myths?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. So apropos here, since these are the conversations that I have all day, every day. I spend 99% of my time overcoming these myths and objections with companies all over the world. So I want to lay out a few myths as really good conversation starters, and I do have some really strong opinions about these as well, and we'll put them out there, but really want this to be conversational. And so the one I hear the most often: we can't find diverse and non-traditional talent. We're looking, but they're just not out there. And to that, I would pose a question back, which is, where are you looking? And if the answer to that is we're looking on LinkedIn, we're looking at universities, we're looking in alumni associations, social clubs, you're probably not going to find what you're looking for. And there are a few reasons, right? I mean, you look kind of traditionally at communities of color, marginalized groups may not be living in those same worlds like LinkedIn and the same four-year universities that you're, used to finding and used to sourcing people from. You might want to look at different job boards that are going to have people coming from retail backgrounds, people coming from upskilling organizations, people coming from community colleges, such as Indeed and Craigslist. You may want to look to community organizations and upskilling orgs as well, like ourselves in SV Academy. And so I think that's a really key one, but you got to just get creative when it comes to where you're finding your pipeline. And another one that we come up against a lot is, why would we take the chance on, non-traditional talent when we're in the midst of a global pandemic and I've got overqualified people with 10 years of experience at the same price point? And to that, I would say, diverse and non-traditional doesn't mean you're going to have to lower the bar for quality of hire, right? I think, you need to get creative when you think about backgrounds, but also, you're taking a chance on any candidate. Recruiting is not a science. Recruiting is somewhat of an art. And so if you're going to be investing in someone, you should be investing in someone who has the raw material, right? The grit, the intelligence, the tenacity, the fire in the belly. Those are really the qualities that are going to be indicative of long-term success. And another one that I know everyone will love, we don't have budget. We don't have the money. We can't put money into diversity. I can just see Angela thinking like, I'm getting the wheels turning. And anecdotally, my experiences here, if I have firms who are willing to pay $150K search fee for an executive level hire to scale a company to, from 50 to $100 million in revenue, you can definitely divert money to diversity programs, and you can certainly put some of that into placement fees for hiring, non-traditional and diverse candidates, bar none, right? And then, a last one, which, I think is really just the most kind of egregious display is we interview diverse candidates, isn't that enough? To which I would say, interviewing someone doesn't really do them a service. If you bring someone through the process and you say that's enough, but you don't hire them, to me, that's not really walking the walk. So I'll leave those out there as the big themes and we can move along.
That's a great point, Kate. And I love, there's a couple things I love about what you said. First is finding people from non-traditional backgrounds, some of the best colleagues, scrappiest, most innovative, these problem solvers that everyone says they're looking for in these roles don't necessarily come from a marketing specialist role if you're looking for a senior marketer, or if you're looking for an AE team lead, they might not have been a team lead at another SaaS company. They could be from a completely different industry, and really taking into account those transferable roles is important. And then something else too is we actually had an RSVP question submitted about what do you guys think about the Rooney Rule, which is ensuring that you have enough diverse interviews. And like Kate said, interviewing is just not enough. But next up, I'd love to hear, Angela, what are your perspectives on debunking the most common myths associated with building diverse organizations?
Absolutely. And Kate, I love that you caught my head nod there. Thank you for kind of warming up the conversation here. Obviously, all of us are super passionate about talking through a lot of these things. I think, to your point, one of the myths that you hear very often is, well, if we hire diverse candidates, our organization will be diverse. And sort of to Kate's last sentiment there, it's this idea that, if we open the door and they come, that's it. But in order for people to sort of grow and want to stay at an organization, that candidate experience then translates into employee experience, what then means actually cultivating that space, leading to a place of actual belonging versus them just being here to sort of fulfill a status quo. And I think really cultivating that, and that can look like a number of different things, but even thinking about process and growth are things that are pretty integral to ensuring that you're creating a very diverse, truly diverse and inclusive environment. So that's definitely one there. I think another one that you hear a lot too is that DE&I is a people team thing. And I think a lot of times, and I know people have seen, job listings sort of skyrocket around DE&I consultants, DE&I and belonging manager, which it's great. It's wonderful seeing that happen, especially within the tech space. But in order for an organization, I think, to truly be diverse, it's got to be a holistic investment from all teams, commitment from all leaders, and frankly, dedicated budget. And to Kate's point from earlier, you know, it's this idea that where do we get this money from? Well, diversity actually doesn't have to live outside of what you're trying to do on a team or organization. So I know we'll dive a little bit deeper into that since this is the first prompt, but so, you know, each team has their own goals and OKRs. And so it's like, we have to then be able to tie specific goals that are really, you know, intrinsic to holistic DE&I. And I think to embed that as much as possible within the organization in all facets, it's really, really key for cultivating scalable and sustainable programs like this. And then lastly, for, you know, a more problematic myth that I've definitely heard a lot in this space is that, you know, diversity is a problem as opposed to access to opportunity, right? So what are we doing within the actual space once the stellar candidate comes through? What are we building for them internally to ensure that, you know, they have equitable access to opportunities like promotion, like, you know, bonuses, salary increases, all of those things that are actually the most tangible things that you can tie to things being equitable and inclusive. So I think, yeah, from Kate's perspective, it's like this idea of this, you know, candidate experience. What can we do to get the right people through the door? But then that journey really does have to continue further, longer, and really investment from throughout the entire organization.
Completely. And I think Angela actually did a great job of keeping us honest for this panel. We really wanted her to be a part of this. And she definitely said at first, like, hiring for diversity isn't enough. It's about building those organizations. So we really shaped the content around not just hiring for diversity, but building your organizations around diversity. So appreciate her input there incredibly. And then last but not least on this point, Andrae, would love to hear your perspectives about debunking the most common myths associated to building diverse organizations.
Yeah, sure. For me, I think it's really centers around two things, both stemming exactly from what Kate and Angela said. I think structurally, to go in line with a lot of Kate's comments, the thing that I always look to first is, what does the executive leadership level look like from a diversity standpoint? Like the highest level stakeholders sitting in the room, from the board to the C-suite to the senior executive leadership. And usually when there's a lot of diversity, however you'd like to define it in those ranks, it tends to trickle out throughout the rest of the organization. Not always, right? To in line with Angela says, like, you still have to own it, but when they're thinking about it and when the highest levels of organization or leadership, it creates a different feel of accountability that forces people to champion it, maybe to the extent that isn't always the case. So I would say that would be one. And then two, directly in line too with what everyone is saying, I always look at, specifically when you're thinking about hiring for diversity, like your job posting, right? I think that was something that Angela had mentioned earlier. And the thing I'm always fascinated is when I see an entry-level job that asks for 3 to 5 years of experience, right? And it's like the only way you would have gotten that is as interning. And that's a really privileged position to be able to intern at times, right? Like I've got the opportunity, but you know, I grew up in a wealthy middle-class family in California, right? Like that's not everybody's experience. And so without that internship years while you're in college or possibly even high school, it's impossible to get your foot into the door. So I would really force companies to look at themselves and say, okay, we have an entry-level job. Do we really need 36 months of experience? Or could somebody learn this, right? Can we develop a training program to develop people to do this? Or can we look to an outside organization like Kate's Org or SV Academy, right? So climb higher, right? And so I think that those two things specifically in terms of like how you actually are posting jobs and then who are the types of people that are leading your organization are the ones that, for me at least, are cornerstones to being able to build a diverse org.
Definitely. I think we all agree on that for Andrae. And I think something you said also relates to Angela's point about it's not just in your people team and it's not just in your executive team. It's like, who are you hiring throughout your entire organization? And is this something they care about deeply? And that, I think that ties in really well with what you both said. It looks like we had a question come in from Danita Fleck on what about diversity to include the disabled, how can this be increased? And I think that's a really good point. We talked about in our prep session kind of addressing, like, diversity isn't just about race, it's about kind of the 4 protected classes of people. So it's gender, it's race, it's disability, and it's veteran status. And we talked a lot about that in our prep session. I think Andrae made a good point on including veterans here, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. And even more to that point, my mother had multiple sclerosis, right? And so she worked the vast majority of her working life, at least from when I was born, she was in a wheelchair and worked for the state of California for like over 40 years. So I'm 100% understanding that, like, when you think about diversity, and she was the director of DEI for the Attorney General's office. And so for me, like, I'm very sensitive to the fact that from the soldier standpoint, and then just from a civilian standpoint, like, diversity isn't always cultural diversity. Diversity can be a bunch of different things. Angela made an excellent point about often during onboarding, you push around a bar cart. I know I've done it at least a few times at a job. So for people that may be sensitive to or recovering from alcohol, is that the most welcoming way to onboard someone into your organization? So I think that specifically to answer the question about, again, I don't want to just make it solely about disabilities, but any sort of thing that would make you sensitive, and your organization should, you know, without asking you outright certain questions, I think that there is a way that as people onboard and as they meet with their direct managers and to the people in the HR org that they are going to entrust that information with, that it is a combination of the org having open ears to want to hear that information without people feeling like they have to be compelled to share it, because some people may not feel compelled to share that, while at the same time having a system in place. So should someone want to take advantage of those opportunities or those things that are there for them to help support them, they're there. I think that's the thing. It's the transparency of here's a structure and a framework we have in place for everyone. Show it to everyone that comes on board, because your situation may change from when you start, right? And for those that like to leverage it, we're here to have the conversation, right? But not feeling like it's forced upon you is key.
Completely. Thanks, Andrae. I did a bit of a quick tee up for you there, so apologies if I caught you off guard, but you did an awesome job answering. I remembered that we had talked about that a bit in our prep session, so I was hoping you'd have an awesome response, and you did. So moving on to the next prompt for today's panel, we're talking about doing hiring the right way and building your organization with a diverse mindset. So how do you hire for diversity without tokenizing or singling people out? Some examples of this might be recruiting processes, scorecards, tools that support unbiased job descriptions, and so on. Angela, I'd love for you to take us off for this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thank you for mentioning earlier. So my focus with a lot of these responses are really around more, the employee experience, but you can't talk about employee experience without talking about candidate experience. It all kind of bleeds into one another 1,000%. So obviously, I mean, job description, language is like, you really have to ensure that, let's say you are trying to source and you want to have a, sort of like a global wide net of who you're trying to reach. Okay, well then how are you presenting the actual role? What words are you using? What maybe, anecdotes are you using that are maybe more specific to a US-centric office or a US-centric, candidate pool versus someone who's based, in the EU. So there's a lot of different things that I think, should really consider when you are laying out the job and the types of words that you're using. And I think also a big part of, ensuring that you're not going to be tokenizing or singling people out is also with, I think within recruiting, there's a lot of opportunity for proactive action. So I think that, if you're proactively seeking candidates from diverse pools, are you doing that? What does that look like? How do those sourcing strategies look? I think there's a lot of opportunity instead of having people come to you for you to go and seek people out. And I think that is definitely one of the sort of strengths within recruiting and saying that you're going to hire more inclusive and or more diverse. Obviously, things like employer branding are really, really key. Again, language. How are you presenting yourself as an organization? And I think, to that end, who is interviewing who for what, I think is really, really key. I think in order to ensure that people are, checking themselves. We all have bias. It's something that's inherent in us, in our upbringing, our experience. And so naturally, people are going to gravitate towards similar people. So how do we not necessarily prevent that, but just kind of open people's minds up a bit in terms of how, like, what questions they're asking, how are they seeing if someone is going to be a good fit. Just because they happen to be really into football does not necessarily mean they're going to be the best team player for your, you know, team. So I think there are things that, you know, you have to kind of unlearn a little bit. And I think from the recruiting and sort of HR perspective, these are sort of tools that come in the form of interview training, you know, unconscious bias training, and then, you know, also referral programs. It's, again, this idea that you're trying to sort of unlearn these biases that you have. You know, maybe you want to like recommend your buddy, but maybe your buddy then is not necessarily going to be a culture add. They're just going to be a culture fit and sort of, you know, continue to create this kind of culture that's not necessarily going to be diverse or inclusive or welcoming to all different types of people. So I think there's definitely a lot of different ways that I think us on the recruiting and HR side of things can really look into.
I think those are all amazing points, Angela. And during our prep session, we usually schedule 30 minutes for these to prep for digital panels. I think this one ran to like 50 minutes and we're like bursting at the seams with content we want to talk about. So thanks for hanging in there with all these ideas that are being spewed and just experiences. Two things I loved that you said were the hiring of your friend, and just because you love someone during an interview doesn't mean just because you relate on a personal level doesn't mean that they're necessarily the best fit for your organization. And I am in love with the tech industry as a whole kind of moving away from culture fit to culture add. It's so important that people from different backgrounds come together, because those are like the most diverse, innovative organizations that can make decisions, because everyone has a different perspective to chime in on. Next up, Andrae, I'd love to hear about ways that you feel that we can avoid tokenizing and singling out candidates for their experiences.
Yeah, sure. Mine's actually pretty short. I would say it's really just two quick things. I think one, and it'll be the theme probably to the vast majority of my answers, is just transparency. I think the more transparency that you have in your process, then it makes it a lot easier for people to feel comfortable that there isn't some, you know, like very complicated process by which you have to get hired at an organization. So the more transparent you are, then it assuages a lot of fears. And then I would also say, and this kind of goes in line to the question to the person that asked about, you know, how do you champion for disability in terms of rules too, and to make sure people feel comfortable, is having a framework in place like employee resource groups. Right. So like a larger enterprise, right, or even a smaller one, wherever, doesn't matter. You can have one around veterans. I've worked at companies where they're around millennials, right? And so you can leave it open to people, you know, obviously within the boundaries of your company's ethics, right, to frame these groups so people can feel inclusive and open to everyone to be able to participate, right? Even the millennial group had people that weren't millennials in their group, right? And it's, so I think that it's a way where you can be information sharing and culture sharing in a way where it's a structure. Sometimes it's outside of work, but at the same point, ultimately what you're doing is you're trying to show people that we'd like to be a home for you, right? We'd like to you're spending just as much time here as you are basically in your normal life. So, you know, these are the ways we'd like to welcome you. And when we say you, we mean you, right? Like the parts about you that you'd like to share.
I love all of that. And I think something a lot of people have is they feel like they're like two different selves at home and at work, because those are very different like cultural experiences for them. And like I think all four of us agree, and everyone on this in the attendee group would agree, that we wish that it was kind of just like blurred lines. And I think we're like moving towards a world more like that now, because we're all at home constantly and work is just showing up there. So I think that's a really awesome point, and we should really blur those lines even more between like your home self and your work self. That should just be the same person. Kate, next up.
Yeah, amazing points, Angela and Andrae. And I would say, what a perfect segue, just the conversation now about bringing your whole self to work, right? And that 10, 15 years ago, that wasn't something that was okay. And I think that also was just, you know, contributing to the problem. And so I would say, like, on that note, you know, when it comes to the tools that you use, and I'm speaking from the hiring perspective, think about those tools and whether or not any of those tools, each and every one, whether or not they are foreclosing any group of people that you would otherwise want to have in front of you, right? We all know, like, the ATS. The ATS classically, if the job description is asking for a 4-year degree from a top institution, if it's saying MBA preferred, if it's saying all of these things that are based on a really typical type of pedigree, you're going to lose a whole bunch of people. And so I would say ditch it in any way that you can when you're looking for your, diverse and non-traditional pipeline. And then also the assessment tools that you use. Many of the assessments that we use, like aptitude assessments and tests, those were created, for a population that, is really essentially white middle class, right? I think that, there's a lot of groups out there who have been completely failed by a traditional education system, right? Like both those who are like differently abled and both like racial and ethnic. And so think about that, right? If somebody's visually impaired, how are they going to be able to take this assessment? Will they be able to? Will they voice that they're having difficulty with it? So think about those things, really deeply. And there are some tools. I think going back to Angela's point on job descriptions, you can use Textio, which can help just kind of level the playing field with some of the language to make it more inclusive and accessible. And then for assessments, Pymetrics is a fantastic tool. It's been like really rigorously gone over for unconscious bias and bias, and Capfinity as well. So think about integrating some of those tools, into your recruiting process. And lastly, mindset. Mindset is going to be the game changer. I'll actually just illustrate it with a story. So we had a couple of candidates who were going up for a role, and one of them, got dinged in the interview process because she wasn't able to complete the arc of her story, right? So she wasn't able to come home and say, I failed at this thing, and then I went back at it, and then I brought it home and I did the thing. But in her mind, that was, a really beautiful story arc. Like she failed, and she went at it. And 6 months ago, she was a family assistant, and now she's going to be, a sales development representative. And so I would say, recruiters, like, get out of the mindset that there's a typical way and a narrow way that questions should be answered. To really take into account, it should really take into account all the vast experience that person could bring to the table outside of our typical definitions of, talent and qualifications.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next question and theme that our panelists are going to discuss today. So next up, it's really about the candidate experience. We're kind of taking this to a new level. What negative things do people experience? Positive too, I suppose. What does a diverse candidate experience look like, i.e. microaggressions? We've been hearing that a lot within the tech community. And how can we improve on this? Kate, I'd love to hear your perspective first.
Yeah, I'll keep mine brief. I really think that, Angela and Andrae are going to have so much to contribute from like the organizational standpoint, and my lens is kind of always the hiring and recruiting lens. The one thing I would say is that I can't hammer home enough the importance of evaluating what you mean by culture. And we talk about this culture fit, culture add. We talk about hiring for culture. We have, a culture that is like rigorous and metrics driven and what have you. I would say take apart every one of those cultural tenets that you hold so dear, and ask if those are going to be keeping people out. Is how you define your culture just going to keep getting you more of the same and make for a non-inclusive candidate experience? Or are you really going to be pushing the boundaries and looking for people who push your perspectives and who really challenge you in new ways with their life experiences? And I think that's really my biggest takeaway, other than also we've shown time and again that like heterogeneous companies just outperform ones that are homogeneous time and again, right? You may want to hire your happy hour buddies, but those aren't necessarily the people that are going to drive you to innovate.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. I think those are all incredible points. And then Andrae, I'd love to tee you up for this question. And then we also had another question come in from Michael Becker in the attendee group. He wants us to share some of the forums and online communities you guys use to connect with underrepresented talent. He agrees that it's important to look beyond the usual alumni communities and friend networks, but sometimes we don't know where to look. So does anyone have any, or Kate specifically, do you have any, or I'm sorry, Andrae specifically, do you have any answers to chime back at, Michael?
Yeah, I can give it to. I'll leave some space for Kate to kind of answer that one too, because I'm sure she actually has a much more robust answer than myself. I would say that one, like we said before, organizations like Kate's Org, Climb Hire, SV Academy, those are great places to start. Again, even if you're not necessarily doing the hiring, they're also content sharing information, right? So if what you're looking is for a place to go on LinkedIn to be able to find some people to follow, to understand from a thought leadership standpoint, those are just great places to start. I would also say you could think about organizations like, so for example, Revenue Collective has a Revenue Collective of color, right? Where you can be a part of that forum and that will give you access to the hiring boards as well. I think that another place that can be really good in terms of, again, trying to access and find communities. I can't remember who said it before, was community college. I'd never thought about that, right? Like the military's there recruiting, right? Like that's such a genius place to be there to look for people that are strong, hardworking, and honestly, like, they're going to be dedicated, right? And because it's most likely the people that are going to community college are working. That's why I say that. Not to say that a four-year college graduate isn't dedicated, right? But often in the situation, they may
Different
not be working
lifestyle.
full-time, right? Like a community college student would be. So I think those are great places, right? Really simple. And then as far as the candidate experience aspect, again, really simple. I think same thing over and over again. Transparency, transparency, transparency. I think transparency leads to diversity. I really do. I think that when people look at something and say, oh man, I have no clue how to get a job there, their natural inclination is they feel like there's only a certain type of person that gets hired there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where when you can look at a job and you can see people that look like you that have gotten jobs there, and more importantly, they have on their website the steps and process by which the application flows, and maybe they let you know after you've applied how long until you'll be reached back, and that you for sure will be reached back with either way. Those are huge things, right? And I think that it's just stuff along the way like that. The more you can try to actively go out there to show that, listen, we have our feelers out. We are trying to be transparent. We get that our process might not be perfect, but we would like you to still apply. And to the extent that we can, we want to give you a very fair evaluation, right? And I think the more you can lay your cards on the table like that, the more people will respect it and be interested in wanting to apply for your company.
Completely. And I think that something else that was brought up earlier is kind of looking into other diverse groups, or that, like, someone recovering from like an alcohol addiction or something like that. It's like you don't want to be pushing a bar cart around the office. So just looking into things like that and just being aware of what you're doing, whether or not it can make someone feel excluded from the experience within your office. And then Kate, just on Michael's question, did you have anything you wanted to add with where to look?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also be more than happy to follow up with anyone who wants with a more exhaustive list, but I'll give you, a place to start. So there's a really neat platform called Matheson, which is new in my world, but you can go on there and you can find, really good kind of hidden, overlooked talent. A lot of the times people who were maybe educated overseas and are coming here looking for work. Really neat platform. I would encourage you to check it out. And then, other organizations like ours, I mean, I will totally plug the competition all day and night. But you've got Co-op, Merit America, you've got Pep Up Tech, you've got Spark Mindset out of Denver. Really the list goes on. And I would also say, go into Indeed, go to Craigslist, see who is there floating around, because I say, we have folks coming through who are, sitting on 2 years of a computer science degree and are working at Burlington Coat Factory as a cashier. How would you know that person is there if you're working at Facebook or Google and you're recruiting? How do you know? And so I think that's really one of the reasons why you should absolutely look to upskilling orgs for your candidates, but then also get creative, get out there, see what's out there, and open your mind to these folks, whose resumes may not jump out at you at first blush.
Definitely. I think those are all incredible points. And then just to wrap on this question, Angela, anything you'd like to add here?
No, I think Andrae and Kate did a fantastic job. Again, sort of my realm is not so much on the hire portion, but I will say from an HR and also recruiting perspective that there are a lot of people sort of asking the same questions that are dealing with the same sort of problems. So for me, at least, I found a lot of insight perhaps in things like Resources for Humans, which is like an HR recruiting group that's put on by Lattice. There's also People Geeks. And again, those are things directly related to more HR, but there are different forums within that space that talk a little bit more about and again, especially recently, talking more about sort of how we can really integrate DE&I with everything that we're doing. So I would say that's even a great place just to get some resources around how to even start thinking about that, or just where to start. So.
Definitely. Thanks, Angela. And then on the candidate experience front, you made some really great points just about like learning and development. The candidate experience doesn't just stop once they sign their acceptance letter or whatever. It goes a lot further than that. Every interaction they have, if they have situations at home that they have to deal with, like I think that's really important too. Do you want to add anything there, Angela?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, it's incredibly important to align whatever you're doing from a sort of recruiting strategy or hiring strategy to whatever you're trying to build within learning and development, and especially onboarding. I mean, those first couple of weeks are really, I think, just crucial to somebody really feeling like they belong at a place. And that's a great opportunity for both the employer and employee, right? So I think, there's always room for improvement and feedback. I think onboarding and sort of the employee experience is a living, breathing thing. You're never going to get it right 1,000% the first time. You always have to add and adjust. And that also, again, is sort of a really great situation to be in, because the more sort of diverse in terms of who you're bringing in for employees, the more they can add to that mix as well. And it's been really amazing, I think, especially at ONA, to see that kind of transform as more global, as our teams are getting more global and more diverse in that realm. But yes, to Andre's point earlier around, and also Hannah, you mentioned again briefly, around just this idea of being empathetic. We all have to lead with empathy. I think especially now and Kate made a great point about this earlier, where, we're here, like our personal professional lives are sort of in the same realm. We have our partners, our kids, our roommates, our parents, who knows, So I think the more that we can lead with empathy and lead with this human first approach, the better you're going to be able to create a space for people to truly want to grow and really stay. And so, again, I know I've said language and communication a lot, but it's so important. I'm going to bring up something that I'm going to tell you as soon as I point this out. Most of you will probably point this out in your day-to-day and be like, oh my gosh, this is happening kind of a lot. But my number one pet peeve is when people address a group of people, regardless of how they identify, as hey guys. You hear that a lot in sales. You hear that a lot in tech. You hear that a lot everywhere, really. And so this example is extremely exclusive. It's this idea that, everyone there is hey guys. Especially now when we're still dealing with unequal wages and pay gaps between men and women within the workplace, I think it's a very, alienating thing to kind of notice. And again, I'm pointing this out not to spotlight anyone or kind of make anyone feel, that I'm putting you on blast, but essentially it's just that we can't, number one, this is not gender neutral. We can't claim to know how people identify themselves. And also, again, it's how do you expect to create an inclusive and diverse environment when you're using language that is inherently exclusive? So yeah, I think a lot of those things really just kind of tie back together within recruiting and how that kind of dives back into the employee experience. Yeah, it's definitely all connected.
Definitely. And I think that's one of the things with this topic is like everything we say and everything that gets said here, I'm like, oh, but what about this point? We didn't talk about this. There's so many things to hit here. So thanks everyone for coming along this conversation with us. Just two things I wanted to add here is I saw something that just like what Angela said is the hey guys, there's so many alternatives there. There's hey all, hey team. Hey, these specific people's names. There's so many alternatives there that you can completely shift your language away from that. And then just another community that our modern sales pros has come across recently, actually through our DE&I committee, is Balance. It's a community specifically for Black professionals, and it's like growing incredibly fast, and it's basically like a modern sales pros community, but it spans the whole gamut of professions. So that's a really great community just for people to connect with and just to kind of like find another source. So like that's another great community, and there's people from all walks of like all professional backgrounds there. So regardless of like the talent pool you're looking for in terms of like function, whether it's finance or sales or whatever, that's a great place to look. We're going to go ahead and move into our last prompt for today. And it is, the theme is we're here for the long haul. So having a diverse workforce goes beyond hiring. It's an organizational commitment. Something we like to say is that it's a program, not just a project. And I'd love to dive into what our panelists think on that. Angela, I'd love to kick it off with you. This is like your bread and butter. It's not just talent, but sourcing. It's the whole gamut of things.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Again, I think it's an extension of earlier points that I've made, earlier points that both Andrae and Kate have made, sort of around, you know, it's got to be more than just on the surface. It really, really has to be a collaborative effort and commitment and representation across all teams, especially leadership. And that can look like in the way of, you know, leadership advocating for these initiatives. But at the same time, if you really want to break it down, I think that it's important to put, you know, to just, if you're going to say you're going to do something, you have to put the money in it. You have to put the effort in it. You got to put the time and commitment into it. And I think that goes with anything, I guess, in life, but just in general here, you know, for something to be more than just an initiative, more than just a project, it really has to be infiltrated amongst the entire organization. And I think now we're seeing so many companies bring on, you know, DE&I consultants, as I mentioned before. And the one thing that, you know, I've noticed as I'm talking to people sort of within this space is like, well, I didn't realize that it was going to be like this. I didn't realize that it was going to be this hard. And I'm like, well, of course it is. Like, this consultant's not coming in to make you feel warm and fuzzy and be like, okay, this is what you're doing great. You're doing all these things. They're coming in to essentially point out what you need to improve on and what you need to work towards in order to really live by the words that you say you want to live by. So I think it's, you know, in terms of it going beyond this and being an organizational commitment, I think we just have to ask ourselves these hard questions and get real with ourselves. And a lot of the issues that we're facing today, they're not new. It's just that they're being shared and recorded now more than ever. So it's ingrained, it's systemic. So one initiative is not going to change the structure of a larger issue, right? So I think, yes, organizational commitment, but people comprise an organization. So how do we as individuals, leaders, mentors, colleagues, friends, how are we actively, you know, upholding these systems? Like, how are we actively being anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-homophobic? The list goes on. And so I think it really does then drill down to what we can do at our own level to encourage these spaces and these kind of conversations to happen. And I think, you know, to that point, the most tangible things that an organization can point to say that if they're being equitable or not are their promotion and career growth tracks, their salary information. So I always like to ask this question of like, if your organization publicized their salary for every single person that worked there, how would you feel about that? Like, how would you really feel about that? And what would that look like from an optics perspective, right? How would people feel about that too? So just closing that, it's, you know, yes, it's an organization's responsibility to provide those equitable and inclusive opportunities, but I think that really does involve a huge team effort for sure.
Completely. And I think we're seeing the world like shift towards prioritizing this more, which is incredible because it was unprioritized for so long. And like Angela's point earlier, it's looking for this in like your candidates and your employees and your business units outside of your HR teams, like in their individual mindsets. And is this something everyone cares about? Because it really should be. Next up, Kate, on this last theme that we're covering is having a diverse workforce goes beyond hiring. It's an organizational commitment. What would you like to share on this point? Oh, I think you're muted. There you go. Yeah.
It's like the 2020 tagline, you're on mute. So I think that my awesome co-panelists here have covered a lot of this, and it's really their wonderful areas of expertise. But what I would say is that I catch glimpses of this, right? Certainly when I'm working with hiring managers and people who are like deeply embedded in their organizations. And I was driving in the car last week, and I just happened, the stars aligned, and I turned on NPR, and there was this segment on about kind of the big conversation around diversity hiring, and just attitudes toward diversity in 2020. And what they were saying was that we're now in a global pandemic, and we're also in the thrust of the Black Lives Matter movement and kind of greater unrest around social justice. And this has been thrust to the discourse, and it's something that we can't ignore. And so now people are largely distributed, working from home, and thinking about this kind of in a vacuum, right? Away from physically from their teams. But I think that it brings a new accountability, right? Like, companies have to be actively anti-racist in 2020. They cannot just sit back and be tolerant and say, all the things we talked about before, well, we're hiring, but our slates are diverse, but we hired a chief diversity officer. I think now we're getting to what's underneath that, down to every single employee in the organization. Do they have an anti-racist mindset? And so in my mind, that kind of ties it all together, right? I mean, that's going to be the new normal, I hope.
Completely. And that's exactly what I think Angela was hitting on as well. It's like an individual thing, and everyone needs to have this mindset now, and everyone needs to be doing the work. Not just your organization. It goes so much deeper than that. And then to close us out on this last theme, Andre, anything you'd like to have on the organizational, or anything you'd like to add on the organizational commitment front?
Just to kind of echo a lot of what everyone has already said, I think one thing that is key, specifically when you talk about the promotion and development, is, are there training pathways and training plans in place? Because I think often at an organization, it's like, okay, well, you're going to do this job, and if you want to become eligible for this job, you got to learn the skill set. It's like, okay, well, how am I going to get reps to school up for a new skill set? Say I'm an SDR and I want to become an account executive, right? Or I'm an account executive and want to be a sales director, right? Outside of just crushing quota, there's other skill sets that you need to have to be able to be an effective manager. So to what extent are you going to support me, or can I get that support from my current org? And I think that, again, this is just retention in general, right? Beyond diversity, but the more that, again, specifically diverse candidates can feel that opportunity is there, then the less they feel like, okay, this is just going to be a friendship game, right? And so now let me just go find somewhere else then that might be a better fit for me. No, there's a clear, transparent plan here, and if I can knock these steps out, then I don't understand why I wouldn't be eligible for the promotion. So I think the more you have those frameworks in place, then the less you alleviate yourself from falling into the murky, no one really knows what's going on in the org situation.
Completely. I think that's an incredible point. Having a completely transparent and methodical process for individual career growth within your org is so important. And I think a lot of the times, like you said, that falls under the wayside, and it's just not acceptable anymore. And then something else that I know you added in the prep session, Andre, was giving people kind of the opportunity to stand in the spotlight. Sometimes those entry-level people or people from non-traditional backgrounds don't have as much exposure to executives and people of leadership. Anything you'd like to add on that front?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great one. I think that in terms of being able to, it's almost like you have to have the rep of imagining yourself in the spot first. So getting that chance to stand up and talk to the entire org, even if it's just giving the Monday morning brief, right? It doesn't really matter what the activity is that you're doing, but the chance that, for the first time, every single person, right? Even the CEO is hearing your voice and seeing your name on the Zoom, seeing that you're smart and eloquent, and that, you understand what's going on in the organization, so that should the opportunity arise for another, whatever it might be, come up, your name pops up, right? And so I think that's part of it, that it's the spotlight example is, or maybe being able to deliver on a task, right? Given some individual project that everyone is, use SKO for an example, that's highlighted, that everyone's going to get to see and that you delivered on, right? Those are great ways for you to build self-confidence in employees, right? Without necessarily always giving a promotion per se. And then at the same point, also giving someone the chance to up level and show you that they can, for lack of a better term, ball in a higher league, right? So that ultimately you'll feel confident that should they get promoted, they can handle the workload.
Completely. And that's such a big conversation within the modern sales pros community, just because non-monetary incentives are such a big conversation in the sales world. This is like vital to like the sales organization, and it's something that could almost be used across every function, and sales organizations can use it in a new way, like especially with people like SDRs or newer AEs that really could use and benefit from that face time. So we're moving into the last 5 minutes of this session. There's a couple RSVP questions that I'd like to answer, and then if any attendees have any questions they'd like to submit, like, now's your chance or forever hold your peace. Just kidding. You can always connect with the panelists on LinkedIn. But one question I wanted to tee up for Kate is, how do you manage the like legal expectations and legal requirements in the candidate and hiring and talent sourcing process?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will caveat this first by saying, even though I was raised in a family of all lawyers, I am not a lawyer. So I don't want to make any statements that would be confused as like counsel here. But I will say, I would point you to, if you want some clear answers, to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I think they give a lot of really good guidelines, but more on the hiring. So as far as I understand, and this can be specific to the state of California, the worry really is when it comes to giving preferential treatment for the hire based on any protected class, right? But when it comes to setting internal quotas and targets, that is a very common practice, and I think it's actually one that has really helped companies increase their diverse candidate population, because if you don't kind of train and incentivize and set those things, it can be really difficult to kickstart and get people in the right direction. So as far as I know, as far as what you do internally with your team, that's okay, but the legal aspect where you may want to do some research is around the actual hiring.
Amazing. Thanks, Kate. So we're going into the last few minutes of this, and I know that we talked about a ton of content. This could have been like a 5-hour workshop, but I'd love to kind of just run through the panelists really quickly and chat through your guys' favorite points that you made throughout this panel. So I'd love to start with Angela.
Sure. Oh my gosh, you're right though. It's like, it's almost like overload. My brain right now is like, wow, there are so many things. I'm gonna like revisit the recording and kind of take notes afterwards. But no, I mean, I think the takeaway here is that there's a lot of work to be done, but I do think that, the more conversations like this that do take place, the only better will be in terms of trying to just navigate this very complicated, complex space. I think ultimately, yeah, it's sort of just going back to the point that it can't just be one thing. It has to be all the things, and all the things will take a really long time. So that's okay. We're in it for the long haul, right? So I think, yeah, I'm just really, just was thrilled to be able to chat alongside with Andrae and Kate, who brought up some really, really amazing points throughout this conversation. And yeah, I think that's sort of my big takeaway from all of this.
Amazing. Thanks, Angela. Andrae, next up.
Oh, very similar. Just, yeah, thank you. The same thing to, yourself, Hannah, and Kate, and Angela, and Richard as well, and then floating in the background there for everybody's help. I would say that for me, the one thing I would say is, if you are someone in charge of job posting, to really audit your years of experience, right? Like, take a look at them and really, really see as like, are these years of experience like precluding me from possibly bringing in someone that all I got to do is school up a little bit, right? Like, to take a little bit more of the onus of wanting to train and grow talent, and not always want to just like hire bullseyes.
Yeah, completely. I know, just from my perspective, like, as someone who's still early on in their career, I see job descriptions all the time that ask for like 3 to 5 more years of experience than I have, and I'm like, I could completely do this. So I think that's a great perspective from the candidate side of things. And then Kate, last but certainly not least.
Absolutely. So I will say, like, my eyes were opened today by Angela and Andrae both on the organizational side. I think I have so much to learn when it comes to, you know, all right, I'm placing entry-level folks into organizations. What happens after that, right? What are the leadership paths and the opportunities and growth paths for people after they're placed? And I just know that I want to continue this conversation and continue to pick their brains after this, so that I can take those learnings to my clients and hiring managers and partners, and just help, you know, push this forward in any way.
I think that's an incredible point. And I'd actually think I'd be really interested to see, like, people say, oh, we hire X% of diverse candidates. How many of those people are there like 2 years after you hire them or whatever? I think that's an awesome point. Thanks, Kate. And I just want to say another thank you to today's panelists. You guys were all incredible. This was some of our first digital panel, and I'm so proud of everyone. You guys kicked it. You guys are rock stars. So from the Modern Sales Pros community, thank you. And thanks for everyone to join. Thanks to everyone for joining today. I hope you found this useful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.